The front door shut behind him with a finality that felt like a verdict. I stood frozen, clutching the shawl draped over my shoulders, trying to steady the whirlwind of shock and disbelief raging inside me. His voice still echoed in my ears. "You have to leave, now. This house is not yours anymore." The coldness in his tone cut deeper than I ever expected. The son I raised, the boy whose scraped knees I kissed and whose dreams I nurtured, had become a stranger wielding words like weapons. I forced myself not to cry, to mask the ache with silence as I gathered a few belongings, an old photo album, my late husband's watch, the clothes I could carry. Each touch unleashed a flood of memories. The laughter around that worn dining table, my husband's steady hands laying brick by brick, the sacrifices made to give my son a chance. This house was more than shelter. It was a lifetime of patience, hard work, and hope. And now, outside on this grey afternoon, it felt like all of that was erased with a lock turning behind me. The sky was heavy, grey, mirroring the cold weight settling in my chest. I wrapped the shawl tighter, drawing a fragile barrier against the biting wind and the bitter sting of rejection. I tried to steady my breathing, to hold on to the dignity that had kept me going all these years. The son I loved had turned his back on me, without explanation, without mercy. I remembered the nights I lingered over bills, stretching every penny so he could finish his education. The evenings I begrudged no rest to care for my ailing husband. The dreams I quietly set aside so my family could move forward. Those sacrifices now felt invisible, unacknowledged. As I stood in silence, the door closing behind him became a cruel punctuation mark in the story of my life. The footsteps fading inside sounded more like a dismissal than a farewell. I had built this home and family with sweat and love, yet here I was, unwelcome, exiled in my own life. The chill of the autumn breeze brushed my face, but it was the cold betrayal that froze me most. Still, even in this darkest moment, a quiet resolve began to stir inside, a tentative flame amid the cold. I placed the photo album carefully on the step, my fingers lingering on the creased edges. Faces smiled back at me, reminders of happier times now stained by this rupture. My heart ached, but I knew tears alone would not reclaim what was lost. There was a silent strength embedded in the years of endurance and sacrifice, a steadfastness no betrayal could break. The streetlight flickered to life, casting long shadows across the pavement where I stood alone. The world continued, indifferent to the storm within me. Yet beneath my stillness, a plan was beginning to take shape, a determination born not out of despair, but from a lifetime of problem-solving, patience, and quiet courage. I would not vanish into this night as a defeated woman. No, this was the moment I had to hold my ground, to remind myself of the dignity I still possessed. Even if the walls around me had closed like a trap, the door behind me was shut tight, but within me, a door was opening. The son who had cast me out believed he had won the battle, but he had yet to see the strength that patience and will could forge. As the wind whispered through the empty street, I stood alone under the heavy sky, no longer a mother cast aside, but a woman awakening to the fight that lay ahead. In the deep silence of that night, as the street emptied and the world seemed to hold its breath, I found myself alone with memories that refused to be quiet. Sitting on the cold steps outside the house I once called home, I allowed my mind to wander backward through the years, each memory a thread woven tightly into the fabric of my identity. The ache of betrayal was cruel, but there was something more enduring beneath it all, the story of resilience born from decades of sacrifice and devotion. I recalled the early years, when he was just a boy with wide eyes and a restless spirit. His laughter filled every corner of this house, and I worked endless hours to ensure those echoes never faded. I could still see the tiredness in my husband's eyes during his final battle with illness, and how I bore the brunt of keeping everything afloat alone. Nights turned to mornings, while I managed hospital visits, budget spreadsheets, and the relentless chores that come with holding a family's fragile balance. Those years were not easy, yet they were the foundation upon which this family was built. The house itself stood as a testament, not just walls and beams, but promises kept, dreams deferred, love invested, without hesitation. There were countless moments that shaped me in ways I had never fully acknowledged before this rupture. Working overtime, I juggled spreadsheets and construction blueprints in my mind long after the workday ended, calculating means and margins, ensuring every penny was stretched to its fullest just to cover his tuition and secure the home. I remembered the personal sacrifices, friendships I let fade, opportunities I declined, and the quiet evenings I spent alone, nursing wounds of exhaustion and worry so no one else would have to. Yet none of those memories carried bitterness, only a solemn pride. I had endured adversity with quiet grace, accepting hardship as part of the path I chose for my family. I never expected gratitude for it, only that the love I poured freely would be returned. But gratitude did not come. Instead, that cold ultimatum shattered everything I believed about loyalty and respect. I kept turning this over in my mind, grappling with the contradiction between the son I knew and the man who had cast me out so abruptly. My thoughts drifted to the countless conversations we had shared, the hopes he once expressed about building his own life, the dreams that seemed so close yet were always just out of reach. I questioned where that warmth had vanished, replaced by impatience and disdain. Had the weight of dependency bred resentment, or was it a deeper fracture hidden beneath years of smiles and careful words? The questions offered no answers, only a growing determination to reclaim what I had lost, not just the house, but my sense of self and dignity. In the solitude of that night, I revisited every sacrifice I had made without complaint. I thought of the budgets I balanced with precision, the investments I managed cautiously, and the resolutions I forged through sheer will. These skills, honed over decades, were still mine. I was not just a mother betrayed. I was a woman equipped with knowledge, with tools that could be wielded quietly but effectively. The engineer in me stirred awake, sensing the possibility of building anew from the ruins of this betrayal. I remembered how the iron would not bend beneath pressure. It only hardened. So too would I take each memory of sacrifice and channel it, this time not toward selfless giving but toward careful reclaiming. The house, the finances, the very legacy I had nurtured, none of it was beyond recovery. I knew that this moment of exile was also a turning point. It was a breach that demanded response, measured not with anger or hasty words, but with calculated strength and resolve. My mind sifted through the financial ledgers I had kept, those yellowed pages still tucked away in the back of a drawer. The records of mortgages, savings, and expenditures became vivid again. There were patterns, inconsistencies perhaps, that my son might have overlooked or underestimated. It occurred to me that the bonds of family and trust, while fragile, need not define the limits of the battle I was prepared to fight. I would lean on every ounce of practical knowledge I had accumulated over a lifetime, a currency far more valuable than the bitterness trying to claim me. It was not just about reclaiming property. It was about restoring respect, restoring justice, restoring the dignity that had been callously stripped away. I imagined myself sitting across a table, documents spread before me, firmly articulating what was rightfully mine. This was the reckoning I had begun preparing for in that quiet night, in the shadow of a door closed but never locked in my heart. As dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, painting the sky with tentative strokes of pink and amber, I felt something shift within me. The pain and disorientation were still there, but now accompanied by a clear purpose. I would not be resigned to a life diminished, nor would I allow the bitterness of betrayal to define my final chapters. Instead, I would rise, methodical and unyielding, like the structures I once designed and built, always standing firm against the forces that sought to bring them down. In that contemplative early morning light, I promised myself a quiet oath, to fight not only for what I had lost, but for the truth etched into every part of my being. Every sleepless night, every unpaid debt, every silent sacrifice. They were the bricks of my legacy, and I would use them now, piece by careful piece, to rebuild a life from this ruin. This was no longer the time to suffer in silence. It was the time to plan, to act, and finally, to reclaim. The days after that night blurred into a relentless tide of contemplation and quiet determination, broken only by the sharp, unexpected ring of the phone. His voice came across cold and demanding, a callous declaration that I owed him repayment of some loan he insisted he had extended to me years ago. I listened with a mixture of shock and disbelief as the figures, dates, and terms spilled out, words that twisted the fabric of our family's trust into something unrecognizable. The audacity of his claim hit me like an icy gale, but beneath the shock stirred something far deeper, a simmering resolve that I would not allow myself to be swept aside by deceit or intimidation. Setting down the receiver carefully, I closed my eyes and let the engineer's mind awaken. How would I deal with such a challenge if it were a structural problem, methodically and with precision? First, gather every record, every document that could put this into perspective. Second, analyze each detail with the cold clarity of one trained to spot weaknesses and flaws. Third, create a plan to reclaim what was rightfully mine, not just the house, but my dignity and peace of mind. For the first time since the door closed behind him, I felt the faintest stirrings of control returning. Nights grew long, lit only by the golden glow of a single lamp, as I pored over dusty ledgers, mortgage statements, and bank records, carefully maintained over decades. Each page whispered tales of sacrifice, the overtime shifts, balancing budgets so that my son's tuition was paid on time, the bills covered even when money was tight. Beneath those pages, however, I also found troubling irregularities. Withdrawals I couldn't recall authorizing, transactions rewritten or scratched out, balances that failed to align. What he sought to hide in confusion was glaringly obvious to my experienced eyes. Where he had gambled on my ignorance, he had underestimated my vigilance. I reminded myself that this was not simply a matter of dollars or property. It was a violation of trust, a severing of bonds forged over years of love and hard work. The documents I gathered became more than proof. They turned into a ledger of my life's dedication and betrayal. Every inconsistency was a crack in the facade he had tried to erect. I carefully flagged each one, annotating the evidence with the steady hand of someone used to assembling complex blueprints. This was no longer a private family matter. It was a confrontation of truth against falsehood, of justice facing manipulation. Even so, the emotional toll was undeniable. I wrestled with the question of whether I could face him, the son who had once been my light and now felt like a shadow I scarcely recognized. Anger surged beneath my calm exterior, but I knew the key was to remain steady, measured, composed. I had learned over years that quick reactions often lead to ruin. Careful patience builds strength over time. To solidify my position, I sought counsel from a trusted old friend, a lawyer known for her clear insight and quiet fortitude, who had once assisted me on community development projects. Meeting in a discreet cafe, I laid out the entire situation, the painstakingly gathered evidence, and the deep, personal wound beneath it all. She listened intently before nodding with confidence. With this kind of documentation, your claim looks solid. The law favors rightful ownership, especially when you can clearly show manipulation or mismanagement. Her words gave me renewed courage. I engaged a private investigator to probe the suspicious financial activities I had uncovered. Each report that came back confirmed my deepest fears: hidden debts he concealed, unauthorized access to accounts I once controlled. It was a picture of deceit spread out before me, the son's unscrupulous actions no longer shadows but stark realities. Throughout this process, I maintained a calm exterior, even when he reached out again. His voice laced with desperation and anger, his demands veiled threats. I met his fury with cool reserve, keeping my voice steady. "I am reviewing every detail," I told him softly but firmly. "I will not surrender what is mine without full scrutiny." The silence that followed was my strongest defense. I refused to be baited into conflict on his terms. This fight was no longer about family sentiment or forgiveness. It was a battle for justice, for preserving the integrity of what I had built with my own hands. I thought back to the countless times I had faced structural flaws in my engineering career. Those weaknesses, if left unattended, could bring down entire buildings, but if addressed carefully, they became points of strength. This was no different. The facade he presented would crack under pressure, and I would be ready. Preparing formal legal letters, gathering sworn affidavits, and consulting intensely with my attorney, I envisioned myself sitting across the mediation table, documents arranged, unwavering in my pursuit. This was a reckoning years in the making, a moment where patience, grit, and truth intersected. The house, the memories, and the years of silent sacrifice were at stake, but more than all that, my self-respect and rightful place in this family. The journey ahead was daunting, riddled with legal complexities and emotional minefields. Still, I had transformed from the woman cast out to the strategist, calculating, determined, unyielding. The fire that had kept me warm through hardship now burned with renewed intensity. Whatever storms were to come, I would meet them as I always had. Calm, steadfast, with the quiet power of a foundation built strong and true. This was no end, but the beginning of my fight. The betrayal was heavy, but beneath it was an indomitable will. Step by step, calculation by calculation, I would rebuild my life, dismantle the lies, and take back what was mine. And through the toil of this battle, I would prove that patience and intelligence are the strongest walls against even the fiercest betrayal. In the quiet hours that stretched long into the night, I found myself surrounded by fragments of my past. Loose papers, faded receipts, and the neat stacks of documents that chronicled years of sacrifice and careful stewardship. My fingers traced the edges of yellowed mortgage statements and bank records, each a fragment of a larger picture that had once been clear and whole. Now, amid the chaos my son's betrayal had wrought, those pages became the foundation upon which I would rebuild not just my claim, but my very identity. The task was daunting in its scale and gravity. This was no mere family quarrel. It was a meticulous search for truth hidden beneath layers of deceit and financial manipulation. As I pored over every detail, patterns began to emerge. Discrepancies in dates that should have aligned, suspicious withdrawals that had slipped through the cracks, signatures scribbled hastily in shadows of secrecy. Each anomaly was a crack in the facade that my son had erected, a facade he believed strong enough to shield his greed and impatience. It struck me then how much this battle mirrored the work I had devoted my life to as a civil engineer. Just as I had once inspected the beams of a building for hidden faults, I was now scrutinizing ledgers and contracts for signs of deception. Structures, whether of steel and concrete or of trust and family, are vulnerable when their integrity is compromised. Yet with careful attention and resilience, those cracks could be exposed and repaired. Unlike the physical structures that I once built, however, this fight was more personal, charged with memories and emotions I could not simply measure and correct with formulas. Nevertheless, the skills I had honed over years, observation, patience, precision, were my guiding light. Recognizing the enormity of the endeavor, I knew I needed more than my own efforts. The labyrinth of legal and financial intricacies lay beyond my singular reach. I reached out to old friends, among them a trusted attorney who had once navigated complex property disputes. Her calm demeanor and clear expertise buoyed me in moments of uncertainty. The law respects clear ownership backed by solid evidence, she assured me. Your meticulous records and this emerging pattern of mismanagement place you in a strong position. But be prepared. The fight ahead is long and demands unyielding focus. Together, we began to transform my collection of documents into a carefully coordinated case. Private investigators were enlisted to trace transactions and debts that had been obfuscated, while forensic accountants pored over the labyrinthine finances that my son had cobbled together in supposed secrecy. Every report they delivered unveiled deeper layers of concealment, unauthorized expenses, missing funds, and debts accumulated without my knowledge or consent. The portrait emerging was damning, exposing a reckless disregard for the very family I had devoted my life to sustaining. As weeks turned into months, my daily routine was consumed with this solitary campaign. Mornings began with a review of new documents at the kitchen table, while faint sunlight spilled over the worn wood. Days were filled with calls and meetings, strategy sessions with my attorney and the specialists we engaged. Nights were a time for reflection and planning, my home bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp as I worked tirelessly to chart the course ahead. The emotional weight bore heavily at times, but beneath it lay a steady core of determination, forged over decades of life's demands. I found sanctuary in unexpected places. My husband's garden, once a place of joy and shared dreams, became a refuge. The sturdy oaks and hardy roses, resilient through storms and seasons, were reminders that growth requires patience and persistence. Their strength in adversity mirrored my own resolve, silently whispering encouragement through the rustle of leaves. The inevitable confrontation with my son drew nearer, a moment I approached not with anger or grief, but with the cold clarity of a woman armed with evidence. When we finally met, it was in a quiet, neutral setting, a room far from the warmth of family, filled instead with the sterile light of impartiality. Before us lay the tangible fruits of months of labor, documents, expert reports, sworn affidavits. His demeanor was a complex mix of defiance, desperation, and perhaps a dawning realization of the battle he faced. Our dialogue was terse, flowing like a stream of accusations met with calm rebuttals. I held steady, answering every claim with facts rather than fury. The contrast between us was stark. His voice rose and faltered as he tried to maintain control. I responded with measured certainty, unshaken by anger or pleading. The gathering of evidence was my shield, silence my sword, each measured word a calculated move in a game he neither understood nor respected. The private investigator's findings confirmed what I had long suspected. Loans concealed in dormant accounts, debts accumulated without notification, even attempts to siphon funds through complex corporate veils, all part of a tapestry of betrayal woven behind my back. Each revelation was like a beam laid bare, exposing the rot beneath what I had once considered steadfast. Late into the night, his calls diminished to silence. Where there had been demands and threats, now there was only absence, a tacit acknowledgement of a weakening hand. Watching him retreat into shadows of his own making carried a bittersweet pang, but I allowed no triumph that overshot careful purpose. This was a battle of patience and precision, not emotion. In the months that followed, my attorney and I refined our case meticulously. We prepared for the inevitable legal proceedings with detailed briefs, comprehensive evidence files, and expert testimonies. Every detail was summoned to fortify my claim, leaving no room for doubt or evasion. The weight of past sacrifices, the quiet hours of heartbreak and hope, they all found expression in these documents, the tangible proof that my life's work was not forfeit. Though the path was steep and lined with uncertainty, I approached it with the calm resolve of a seasoned engineer surveying a complex project. The emotional stakes were immense, but beneath that, the underpinning of logic and justice held firm. I was no longer simply the mother betrayed. I was now an architect of my own future, a woman determined to see her legacy honored. Outside my window, the seasons changed. and the garden blossomed anew, its cycles a living testament to perseverance. So too would my endeavor bear fruit, luminous and enduring. The quiet strength within me, built over years of patience and sacrifice, was ready to face whatever storms came next. This was more than a fight for property or money. It was a reclamation of dignity, a stand against betrayal, a declaration that even in the darkest moments, resolve can build a fortress unassailable. Stone by stone, fact by fact, I was reconstructing my life. The battle would be long, but I was ready, and I would not falter. The moment to act had come. Months of quiet preparation now shaped every decision, every step, and every breath. I was no longer the woman who had stood outside the locked door, stunned and betrayed. I was a force, calm, precise, and relentless. The legal motions were filed, accounts frozen, and claims contested. The first shock rippled through my son's world like a tremor before an earthquake. Suddenly, the man who had dismissed me with harsh words found himself confronted by evidence and consequences he had never anticipated. The justice system moves in its own measured pace, deliberate but unyielding. I waited through endless days, when tension thickened the air like fog. Each interaction with attorneys and court officials was another piece fitting into the grand puzzle. Each legal motion a carefully crafted strike against the falsehoods that had threatened to undo me. I reveled in the quiet satisfaction of watching old ledgers, contracts, and witness statements transform from mere papers into pillars of defense. The first formal notification, the freezing of accounts my son had recklessly accessed, landed like thunder. I heard whispers that his credit was faltering, bills piling up and desperation mounting. Yet I remained an island of composure. I had no intention of delivering cruelty, only of restoring what was just. The tables had turned, subtly but surely, as the power dynamic shifted. No longer was I vulnerable or ignored. The woman they had underestimated now held the reins. I remembered the countless times in my life, as a civil engineer, when I had faced projects threatening to collapse. The keystone moment when an apparently minor fault rippled out, risking the entire structure. I visualized myself now as the keystone for my own life, a single piece of resolve that could uphold everything built from sacrifice and love. My preparation had laid the groundwork. Now the execution was the final test. A tense confrontation became inevitable. The day we faced each other in the presence of the attorneys was charged with a thick silence. He wove desperation and anger through his words, demanding explanations, pleading, and trying to twist narratives to his favor. But I remained steady, a quiet fortress behind documents, facts, and truth. When he lashed out, his rage found no echo in me. Instead, I redirected it with calm certitude, letting my evidence speak louder than his screams. The contrast was palpable. Where he was volatile and reactionary, I was poised and controlled. The first crack in his facade appeared when demands degraded to excuses, and threats gave way to grievances aired defensively. The power was no longer his. Every piece of irrefutable proof that emerged unraveled the stories he had told himself to justify betrayal. As the legal threads pulled tighter around him, the consequences became unmistakable. Financial institutions barred access to accounts he once wielded like weapons. Legal claims suspended his ability to manipulate the assets. His creditworthiness plummeted, exposing reckless financial behavior. I observed all this unfold with a mix of sadness and resolve, not a desire to destroy, but a practical necessity to protect what was mine, what I had built. I navigated this new landscape with the same skill and care I had applied to engineering projects. Every step was deliberate, every decision calculated. I anticipated obstacles, guarded against potential setbacks, and planned contingencies in advance. The legal battle was a complex structure of strategy, patience, and perseverance, each day reinforcing my foundation. The support from my attorney and the private investigator was vital. Their meticulous reports, expert testimonies, and steady counsel became the backbone of my defense. They transformed my lifetime of sacrifices into a clear, undeniable narrative of ownership and betrayal. Together, we fortified my claim and dismantled his falsehoods. Throughout this process, emotions fluctuated beneath my calm exterior. Moments of exhaustion and frustration surfaced, but I quelled them with resolve. I reminded myself that this was more than a legal conflict. It was a personal journey to reclaim dignity and justice. I honored the sacrifices of my past, not with bitterness or revenge, but with strength and clarity. As days transitioned into weeks, the atmosphere shifted. The initial shock wore off for my son. Desperation turned to uncertainty. His attempts to respond grew more calculated yet less convincing. Each misstep was met with a countermeasure, crafted from care and experience. The balance of power had shifted, not with violence or bitterness, but with methodical precision and unwavering patience. I watched as his world trembled beneath the first legal citations and restrictions. The house, once a place where we shared laughter and love, became a symbol of the fractured relationship between us. Yet in the midst of breakdown, I found an unexpected clarity and focus. The rupture, painful as it was, had forged a new path, one where I controlled the outcome. Through this journey, I unearthed reserves of strength I had long overlooked. My mind, sharpened by years of calculations and problem-solving, became my most potent weapon. The raw pain of betrayal transformed into strategic advantage. I harnessed it quietly, steadily, growing stronger with every challenge. The power balance shifted subtly yet unmistakably. I was no longer simply a mother cast out, but a woman standing firm, ready to reclaim her rightful place. The first phase of my campaign, freezing accounts and legally contesting false claims, set the stage for the battles to come. The war was far from over, but a clear message was sent. I would not be silenced, erased, or diminished. In the quiet, after the storm of confrontation, I found moments to reflect. The house, once a home full of promises, now bore witness to resilience and justice. My footsteps traced the familiar halls with a new sense of purpose, each room echoing with memories tempered by a determination to protect what was mine. The years of silent sacrifice had not been for naught. I was ready for the next steps. Legal hearings loomed, and the final reckoning approached. But for now, the first victory was mine, an affirmation of my strength and a warning that I would not back down. I stood tall, steady, and unyielding. The foundation had been shaken, but it would not crumble. The intricate blueprint of my life, forged through patience and intellect, was being restored piece by piece. And in this rebuilding, I found not only justice, but a reclaiming of the dignity that had been threatened. This was more than a legal battle. It was a reclamation of self, a testament to the unyielding power of perseverance. The road ahead remained difficult, but for the first time since the betrayal, I felt the tide beginning to turn. With quiet confidence, I prepared to meet the challenges that awaited. The house was mine, the truth was clear, and my resolve unbreakable. The execution of my plan had begun, and I would see it through to its rightful conclusion. The day of the mediation hearing arrived, shrouded in heavy grey clouds, as if the sky itself understood the gravity of what awaited me. It was more than a simple legal proceeding. It was the crucible where years of betrayal and resilience would be laid bare, and the fate of everything I had built hung in balance. Standing outside the sterile building, I took a moment to steady my breath. The memories of the house behind me, both its warmth and fractures, flooding quietly through my mind. The room where we gathered was cold and unadorned, yet charged with the weight of endless human emotions, hope, fear, anger, and the quest for justice. Across from me sat my son, his posture rigid, eyes darting with a mix of defiance and unease. The boy I had once held in my arms was replaced by a man whose facade keyed into desperation and mounting pressure. Yet beneath that surface, I glimpsed the beginnings of cracks, like fissures in concrete struggling to hold a heavy load. We began with formalities, but the true confrontation unfolded swiftly as I laid out the painstakingly gathered evidence. I spoke clearly and steadily, not allowing the pain of betrayal to cloud my voice. Every document I presented, tax returns, bank statements, sworn affidavits, was a thread weaving a narrative of financial mismanagement and deception I'd uncovered. Each page told the story of trust brutally broken, expenses hidden, and debts assumed without my knowledge. The sterile room seemed to hold its breath as truth settled heavily in every corner. I recounted the timeline with precision, the cold ultimatum to leave my home, his unfounded claims of loans made to me, the deliberate obfuscation of family finances. I did not plead for sympathy, but stated facts backed by numbers, signatures, and corroborating testimony. The mediator leaned in, absorbing every detail, his gaze sharp and impartial. My son attempted to answer, his voice laced with anger, frustration, and fleeting vulnerability. He accused me of misinterpretation and mismanagement, tried to cast doubt on the evidence, and painted himself as a victim of circumstance. But the mediator's questions unraveled his defenses, piercing the veils of deception with patient precision. His once confident assertions faltered beneath the weight of undeniable proof. At times, a flicker of sorrow caught me, memories of laughter and warmth now shadowed by this rupture, yet I pushed it aside, replaced by the clear resolve of a woman who had spent months turning grief into strength, strategy, and endurance. This was no longer about family ties. It was about justice and reclaiming what was mine. Witnesses took their turns, each lending voice to the undeniable truth. The financial experts who traced illicit flows of money, family friends who observed the changes and absences, the private investigator whose detailed reports dismantled every claim of ignorance. Together, their testimonies formed an unbreakable framework supporting my case, anchored in evidence and integrity. As the hours passed, the power within the room shifted. The man who had tried to dictate terms now sat unmasked, his defenses crumbling. His accusations softened to pleas, then fragments of denial. The mediator's rulings reflected the mounting clarity. He carefully dismantled falsehoods and outright lies, making clear the path toward justice. When the final verdict was pronounced, ownership restored to me, the son's claims annulled, I felt a profound release. It was not triumph over him I sought, but the restoration of dignity and truth. The silence that followed the ruling was heavy yet soothing, a balm to years of wounds inflicted by betrayal. Leaving the chamber, a lightness I had not known in months settled over me. The tension that had weighed on my shoulders lifted, the house and my rightful place within it reclaimed. The son's efforts to erase me were undone publicly, replacing humiliation with vindication. In the quiet that came afterward, I walked through the rooms that had witnessed joy and sorrow, each echoing with memories solidified by this victory. This was my home, as it always had been, and now, more than ever, a symbol of resilience, endurance, and justice. The road to this moment had been long, fraught with heartbreak and hardship. But in overcoming, I unearthed reserves of strength and wisdom I had not fully recognized. The woman who entered the courtroom was not the one who had been cast out months before. She was a strategist, a guardian of her legacy, unbowed and determined. Legal procedures still awaited, along with the slow work of healing fractured relationships and rebuilding trust where it could be salvaged. But the hardest battle was won, and with it came a quiet hope, a belief that even in the shadow of betrayal, dignity can be restored and life rebuilt. The house, once a crucible of pain and loss, now stood illuminated by a new light, a beacon of renewal and hope. I would nurture it with care and pride, for it was not just a structure, but a testament to endurance, to the silent power of patience and will. I understood now that this story was far from over, but I faced the future with calm strength. The blueprint of my life was being redrawn, informed by lessons of suffering and perseverance. And in that blueprint, every line and calculation spoke of a woman who refused to be defined by adversity. As I gazed out the window, the first rays of sun breaking through grey clouds seemed almost symbolic, a promise of new beginnings after the storm. The battle had reclaimed more than property. It had reclaimed my voice, my truth, and my place in the world. With steady steps and a resolve sharpened by hardship, I prepared for the chapters yet to come, knowing I would meet them not with fear, but with the quiet confidence that has carried me thus far. This victory was mine, but it was also the foundation for all that remained to be built. The story of betrayal had reached its turning point. Now, the story of renewal and strength would begin. Returning to the house after the mediation hearing, I stepped across the threshold with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. The room seemed softer somehow, bathed in the muted light of late afternoon, their shadows stretched long but less oppressive than before. This was the place I had built piece by piece over decades, a mosaic of memories, sacrifice, and love, and now it bore witness to resilience and justice restored. The air carried a different weight, one of calm possibility rather than tension and betrayal. As I moved through the familiar spaces, each step stirred echoes of the past, laughter that once filled the halls, nights of planning and sacrifice, moments when hope was tempered by hardship. Those memories mingled with the new reality, where the house stood no longer as a symbol of exile, but of reclamation. With each room I touched, the worn kitchen counter, the threadbare armchair, the garden visible through the window, I felt a reclaiming not only of property but of myself. The journey here had been long and arduous, filled with moments of doubt and deep sorrow. Yet, through it all, I uncovered strengths within me I had scarcely acknowledged. I was no longer simply a mother betrayed. I had become a strategist, a guardian of my own legacy. The days spent poring over documents, assembling evidence and confronting painful truths, forged a version of me, tempered by intellect, patience, and enduring resolve. The woman who had once been cast out was now unbowed and resolute. Despite the victory, I knew that the battle was far from over. The legal procedures still awaited their course to finality, and the emotional wounds between myself and my son, between past and present, would take time to heal, if they healed at all. Rebuilding fractured relationships, learning to trust again, and finding peace after the storm would be slow work. But I faced these challenges with a ready heart, knowing that the foundation beneath me had been strengthened through trial. The house itself slowly transformed from a space of grief into a sanctuary of renewal. I took to small acts of caretaking, tending the garden where my husband's hands had once sown, dusting the shelves crowded with family albums, opening windows to let fresh air chase away lingering shadows. Each gesture was an affirmation of life continuing, of warmth returning to a place once shadowed by conflict. In the quiet hours of evening, I allowed myself moments to reflect fully on the path I had walked. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the bitter confrontations, all had carved lines of wisdom into my soul. I had learned that patience is a form of power, and that quiet determination can uproot even the deepest weeds of betrayal. The blueprint of my life was being redrawn, no longer fragile but built upon lessons of suffering transformed into growth. Looking out of the living room window one pale morning, I watched as the first rays of sun pierced through heavy clouds, casting golden light over the familiar trees and rooftops. It felt like a quiet promise of new beginnings after long seasons of hardship. The battle had reclaimed more than property. It had resurrected my voice, my sense of truth, and my rightful place within the world I helped build. The past need not dictate the future, I told myself. The wounds of betrayal, though deep, could give way to healing and strength. I realized that forgiveness would come on my own terms, not as a duty but as a choice when I was ready. My worth was no longer tethered to my son's approval or validation. It rested solidly within me, earned through courage, clarity, and unyielding resolve. With each passing day, I found joy in the simple comforts. A cup of tea by the window, the laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard, the slow unfolding of the seasons in the garden. Life had settled into a new rhythm, marked not by fear or loss, but by steady perseverance and quiet triumph. I knew the road ahead held challenges. The relationships broken could not be mended overnight. Scars remained beneath the surface. Yet in that knowledge was freedom, the freedom to chart a new path, defined not by pain, but by possibility. This house, these memories, this life, were mine to nurture and protect. Standing on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky with hues of pink and amber, I felt a calm resolve wash over me. The woman I had been was gone, replaced by one who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. This victory was not simply an end, but a foundation upon which the rest of my life would be built. The story of betrayal had reached its turning point. Now, the story of renewal and strength would begin. I was ready, not with fear or doubt, but with a quiet confidence born of endurance and hope. The life I reclaimed was mine, sculpted not only by struggle but by the steadfast will to rise again.